Director members for FounderCorps, I want to welcome you all here this morning. FounderCorps is a nonprofit that looks to help the local region and mentor startups and entrepreneurs. So if you are interested in chatting with the cadre of people that we have across different skill sets, you can go to foundercorps.org, or we also are recently entering into a partnership with Co-Founders Lab. If you have an idea and you're looking for a co-founder, you can also use that platform, and you'll see some of our FounderCorps members that are mentors there as well. So I encourage you to do that. With that, I'll give it to Jonathan.
Thank you. So, welcome. I'm Jonathan Aberman, and as Rick mentioned, I'm involved in Founders Corps. I'm also running the Tandem NSI National Security Innovation Initiative that is also sponsoring this. Tandem NSI is a big honking idea. We are working with the national security agencies, primarily Department of Defense-related industry agencies, to foster more direct connection between all the interesting stuff that we all pay for that sits in drawers right now and our entrepreneur community. Dean Parker, who we're going to talk with today, I suppose the most salient thing I can tell you about Dean before I tell you about his background is I was minding my own business one day, and I got this. It was an email from Dean saying, "It's ridiculous we don't know each other. We have 80 zillion friends in common, and I want to know you, and I want to know what you're doing. I want to know how I can help you." And I thought to myself, that is really interesting. You know, why was it interesting to me? It was interesting for a couple of reasons. The first thing was, it really demonstrated what I see again and again through Founders Corps and other organizations I'm involved in, is that this is an incredibly small town. You know, we literally are no more than 1 degree of separation away from everybody that we actually should know, want to know, need to know in order to be effective entrepreneurs in this town. And when Dee and I sat down and compared notes, it was bizarre to me that we hadn't been friends for years. Just bizarre. And it was a great thing that he reached out. The second thing was it showed me one of the things that, as I've gotten to know him, I think makes him a very effective entrepreneur, which is he understands the importance of personal connectedness. And the third thing was, I think he understood and understands that the most effective way in life to be successful is to look for how you can give to people and help people, and how how people who orient themselves in that way tend to, in my experience, to be much more successful. His success is manifest as we'll talk about, he's a really solid guy. And I think that's probably how you would define success most of all, you know, his character, his faith, and so forth. But you know, he also was the founder and CEO of a company called Callis Communications, which is what you call a United Communications Service provider. You built it from scratch, the old school way, and you sold it recently, and now living the dream of working for the man again, which I don't know how that's going to last. The company was a rocket ship. He was on the Inc. 500 list for 6 consecutive years. He was a finalist for Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year. He's a leader. He's involved in various things, including YPO. He's in Mindshare. This man lives a life of making the world a better place. So I really wanted to have him come and join us today, and we're looking forward to talking with you, Dean. So welcome to Coffee and Donuts.
Thank you for being here. It's nice to have friends and family and everybody, well, friendly faces in the audience.
Oh, so I better be nice to you.
You can be.
You brought your
it
peeps.
doesn't normally happen.
So,
all the hecklers in the crowd.
No, I sent them home.
Okay.
I sent them home. They're waiting for me at my house. You know, ooh, why are you back? Anyway, so let's start with the tangible. Talk to us about what your company was about.
So originally, the company was founded in the messaging market, being pagers and devices. And we went out there to open the market in the late 90s and went into a place that was really about a network. So we talk about networks. This was a team of 26 entrepreneurs that got together that said, we want to compete against the major companies in the space, which were PageNet and Metrocall and those guys, which everybody knows in this area very well. And they got together and said, you know, as small guys, we're going to compete. And they had a spot. And one of them was my customer when I was at General Electric. And they said, hey, would you ever want to be an entrepreneur? I said, I'd love to. I said, about 23 years old. They said, get your money together, and we'll teach you how to do the technical side of the business. So I moved at that time to Mobile, Alabama to start a paging company. anybody knows anything about being a Yankee, moving to the deep
You-
south is not the recommended area for success.
How old were you when you did this?
I was 23 years old.
So you didn't know any better.
I said the worst thing you can do is fail.
You know,
fail means
by the way-
you know.
So you turned up. So you turned up in Mobile.
And so I turned up in Mobile, and that was in April. I'll never forget. April 22nd, 1999. We opened the doors June 1st, 1999.
So we kind of, we're both tongue in cheek and when we think, years ago I did a deal in Alabama, Coosa Pines, Alabama, and I got to know the guys in the mill where I was working, and they decided that they liked me, so they said, we were going to put a body in the trunk of your car and call our brother who was a sheriff and tell him, but now we like you, so we won't. Ha ha ha. And it just was, it sounded vaguely plausible to me. I mean, so, but there was a sense, at least when I used to do, because I used to work with a firm when I was a lawyer back when Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth, was based in Atlanta. And I used to do law work as a New Yorker in places in Alabama and Georgia, South Carolina, and so forth. It's culturally very different.
It's different, but I'll tell you, over the last decade, there's been a lot of changes. So Airbus is headquartered, the U.S. here, as you know, in Herndon. Well, their manufacturing headquarters now is in Mobile. So we've had $12 billion of economic development in a 500,000 person population town. So things are changing. I think what we're finding is that with technology and obviously this virtual world we live in, people want quality of life over necessarily population centers. If you're younger, you want to be a population center because you want opportunities.
Right.
And you get to a point in life where quality of life becomes important. So people are trying to find that mix, and I just happen to live in one of those towns. There's a lot of them. Fayetteville, Arkansas. There's 6 billionaires in that little town of 200,000 people. And there's many places around the country like that here that's happening. But you do talk about moving to Alabama. It's definitely changed a lot in the last 14 years since I've been there.
So you were General Electric? Was that your first job out of school?
Yeah, I did that really interesting. I went to school in Lynchburg, Virginia at Liberty University.
Sure.
As you guys probably know well.
Mm-hmm.
And in that process, I finished school in 3 years, but my wife at that time had to finish her last semester of student teaching. So my dad said, you need to get a job. And so I was on my way to Yahoo and to the West Coast because I wanted to go work for one of the big startups. They were popping up in the late 90s. This was summer of 96. And in that process, I sold cars to get a living so I could get to the West Coast.
You sold cars?
I sold cars. And
we'll come
being
back to that in a minute.
We'll come back to that in a minute, I'm sure. So in that process of selling cars, a young VP from General Electric shows up on the lot one day. His name's Kevin Demery. And I give him a chance to get to know him, sell him a car, and a couple days later he calls me and says, "Are you really doing this car salesmanship?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not going to do this forever." But it's a pretty good living, and one thing led to another, and about 2 weeks later, he made me the offer of a lifetime, and I started in indirect distribution, so two-way radio that the police and fire use. They gave me the region from Virginia to Illinois, all the way up to Maine, and said, "Go take care of those dealers and figure it out and serve customers, and you'll figure it out." And I did that, and within 18 months, I was running a $130 million sales division for GE at that time, Ericsson.
Now, I'm willing to bet that you approach car sales not as a zero-sum game. So tell me how you would approach car sales.
The way I approached it is I walked into there and I did what I did everything else in my life. I found out who the best was in the dealership, and it was a guy named David Camp. I'll never forget him. He sat at the corner office right by the owner of the business, and I said to him, I said, "Tell me about what you do well." And he told me about being involved in the bike community and this, that, other thing, and I quickly saw that he was a relationship-based seller. So every time somebody would walk on the lot, I always wanted to go in and figure out how to build a relationship with them. And as we did that, within 3 or 4 months, I was the second highest salesman of selling cars in a place where it's littered with smoking guys on the corner doing it, but I didn't spend any time smoking. I was networking to be able to help provide opportunity.
So you were networking, but I'm willing to, how many of you have bought cars? Exactly. And how many of you have gone to a dealership and they said to you, "Are you ready to buy a car today?" And if you turned around and walked out, right? How many of you sat down with a salesman and said, "How much do you want to pay?" and you walked out, right? I bet you that the way you negotiated was you sat down, you told them a price, it was fair, you were transparent.
So
right?
the way I did is I go in and find out what they wanted, and you have to make sure that they get the things, because at the end the experience of buying a car or getting technology for your business is the same, and I had to figure out what was their driving motivation. In fact, the guy that I bought it, if he was here, he actually works for us now. He's come back around. It's funny how this, I'll talk about my circle of mentorship in a second.
Yeah.
But no, what was interesting about it is, and I forgot the story until his wife reminded me the other day. He's like, do you remember how you sold us running boards on that car? And I said, running boards? What are you talking about? He goes, oh, it was a big debate whether we have running boards or not running boards. We had decided to go with the car. He said, you backed 2 Explorers up, and their daughter, which is now a senior in college,
Right.
she was 5 at the time. She walks up there, and I said, Katie, can you step in the car? And she steps up into the first car and gets in with running boards. And she gets to the second one. She was like a beach whale trying to get on there. And he said, I'll take the running board. Sad, the price, please.
Yeah.
You know, so he's talking about the add-on sales and the way that works. But, you know, you find the need, and then you draw the analogy to help the customer.
You find the need, you draw the analogy, and you don't screw them. And you see, that's what I'm really getting at, and there are a couple of reasons. The first one is, I think that my experience of entrepreneurship is that there's an element of luck in our lives, or providence. But at the end of the day, you have to be in the way. And the way to get in the way for good luck and providence is to not be burning bridges to go along. So I'm thinking to myself, as you're telling me the story about the GE guy, life-changing experience for you, life-changing opportunity. But if you had been the kind of person who had looked at him as a sap to be taken, he never would have connected with you.
So what I didn't tell you is the reason why he offered the job was one reason. The way it worked out was, he showed up on the lot, and everybody was seeing this guy in a Mercedes, and he never came up to the building, he parked down there.
Mhm.
Well, I went and approached him. Turned out his wife had some minor surgery being done, decided, you know, only buy cars once every 10 years, he said. I said, take this car, give me your Mercedes, I'll see you on Saturday. This was on Friday. He's like, what? I was like, just give me your driver's license, all I need. Give me your business card, we're good, I know where to find you, take the car. Well, I took his car and had detailed how to sit in the back. So when he came up to do this, we negotiated, he said, where's my car? And I said, well, we pulled around. He said, what did you do? I said, well, I figured you need your car cleaned and do all that. He said, no one does that stuff. He said, at that moment I knew that there was something different about the way you were going to take care of customers, and I wanted to build a model of young entrepreneur leaders in my corporate board, and that was the difference.
So where and how did you, as 23 years old, figure that out? Was it Liberty? Was it your childhood? How did you start to understand the importance of service as a way to get people to engage with you?
I think it was 2 things. One, obviously, it was part of the way, you know, my faith, which we'll talk a little bit about today, is strong to me. And I was always taught that a true leader is a servant. And the true leaders in this world that do it are the ones that learn how to serve and make their people better. And so I always put myself in a position that I wanted to know, how could I serve somebody? And for this guy, I was like, you know what? He was running, I know, almost a 500-person division, $300 million in revenue. His car was dirty, and I figured I'll make an impression on this guy. I do something different. Because the next guy would park his car, give him his keys, and do something different. And I've always looked at whether it's customers. I was the guy at GE when a customer had to get something out the door. Typically, they would call a number, and people would work through a process and escalate till we get this shipped. I just walked the factory floor, figure out what that person was, introduce him, and says, I got this customer, can we make it happen? And I learned early on in life that if you just serve people, great things happen.
You know, it's a funny thing. My first job, I worked for a Japanese company. And the Japanese business culture is fascinating. And for an American or a kid growing up in Philadelphia, it was my first job in London. And my boss, the way he expressed it, it wasn't in terms of faith. It was in terms of respect. And what he said to me is, if you don't, in everything you do, make the people that you're working with feel like you value them, you will fail in life. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, you should never send somebody a document with a typo in it. I said, well, why? That's what spell check's for. You know, being a 23-year-old Jewish kid from Philadelphia, what did I know? And he said, no, you don't understand. If I have to look at something that's not perfect, you're disrespecting me. And I thought, and that was, for me, that was my 23-year-old experience. Very, very good thing. And I think that's an important lesson to learn in life. If you make it about you, you ultimately are going to have a hard time. Because you grew this company. So you started out, you had this great opportunity at GE, and you end up in Mobile. When you turned up, was the welcome wagon there? Did everybody say, oh, thank gosh you're here, you're going to change our community?
No, I'll never forget leaving obviously a great salary and corporate structure, showing up in a retail store with a part-time college student and myself, and realizing I was the bookkeeper, I was a technician, I was the engineer, and I was the salesperson.
So it's just two of you?
It was
just
just
you, basically?
It was me and a part-time person that said, this was my dream, and I was going to build it from scratch. And I learned real quick that I'll never forget. It was the first night I was there. We were getting ready for our grand opening, and the alarm was off in the building, and my pager starts beeping. I'm like, oh crap! So I'm in the middle of dinner, stop dinner, have to drive back over to the store, realize it was balloons that had popped and set up the motion sensor.
Well,
so you're learning all those things, that you were everything. But the worst thing, the hardest thing, not the worst thing, was to realize that when you come, it's kind of like lending money from a bank. When you work for a big company and go borrow money, you walk in there, you put your salary down, they say, how much you want to borrow, it's no big deal. When you show up at a bank and you're an entrepreneur, they want to know, what are you going to collateralize this? And they have, doesn't matter your vision, your business plan, doesn't matter, they're not going to lend you money, right?
That's right.
It's the same way when you walk into a community. When I walked in, and if I said I work for GE, you had instant respect because you're young, you're successful. When you walk in and said, I'm starting my company, there was no instant respect. So it took me 10 years it took me a decade literally to get into the market that you could be accepted, and that was one of the things as we grew the company. We had about 50 employees when we exited in December. Nobody had an appreciation for the decade of hard work to build relationships in a community in the Southeast that would have let you show up at the right events and have the right network connections. It takes time to do that.
So how does a businessman build credibility in the community? How
One
did you
customer
do it?
at a time.
One
So I'll
customer
never
at a
forget,
time.
the first one was, it was a lady that her dad started the largest real estate company in the state. And I went in there and just did the same thing. She had an issue with cell phones, which I didn't sell cell phones, but I said I was going to solve her problem if she would introduce me to some people. And we did that, and she's still been my realtor and been my friend for almost 15 years now.
Wow.
And then from that, that led to one other relationship. The other principle that I have, and many of you guys know a guy named Mike Lincoln, which is my attorney. He has a philosophy which I think is really important that did inadvertently, didn't realize it. That's what a lot of times to be successful and to be able to make these connections, you just got to show up, you got to be present. And I showed up a lot. So I made a lot of sacrifices through that time of going to a lot of the type of events, making sure people do your face, and then doing the follow-up. To be successful in this networking, you've got to spend a lot of time following up. And one of my principles that, I gave you 10 of them, but one of the principles I have is make sure you're giving to somebody more than you're asking for. And so I'm the guy that quietly, when you hear something, somebody needs something, you do it, it shows up on their desk, or something happens, or you make a connection for them. And those are, in a selfish world we live in, that's the principle that's not used very often.
Do you think that what you just described is really properly appreciated and reported on by the press that covers entrepreneurship?
I think it's underreported. I think a friend of mine is a guy named Dave Ramsey. He's probably best known for his debt-free living. He's on Fox, and he said, I'll never forget in entrepreneurship, he said, everybody thinks you're an overnight success. He said, he says, I remember when I got my first TV show, and all of a sudden it was Dave Ramsey, like, wow, you're on Fox News. And he's like, I've been doing radio for 20 years, guys. This is not an overnight success. I think what's underappreciated is the amount of work and tenacity that it takes behind the scenes. But when you start getting media coverage, they eliminate all that. You're just an instant new face on the team.
Yeah, I see it a lot. I teach over at Maryland, and not as much in the MBAs, but the undergraduates I teach entrepreneurship to, they think entrepreneurship is Mark Zuckerberg, and just somehow miraculously Facebook just falls from the sky. And my experience is much more entrepreneurship is grinding it out, what you described, one customer at a time, one opportunity at a time.
We almost went out of business twice before we got to this, and there's a lot of people, Catherine, that work with us and stuff, can tell you that we were in a sales cycle, and I was exhausted and burnt out, which I'm sure you'll hit in a second. 2 years ago, selling to a company here in Reston, and the deal fell apart, and I thought the world had ended, right? Didn't have the executive staff, didn't have everything we needed to keep going. But then the retool and the energizing is what changes it. So I think through every circumstance that is negative, there can be a positive outcome. It depends on how you look at it and what you're willing to take from that to learn to continue to move forward. That's
another attribute that I see in you, and I see in most of my entrepreneur friends that are successful, is I call it the ability to fail upward. That folks that fail and stop, fail. Entrepreneurs look at failure, and it's not failure, it's opportunity. So,
but because it's interesting, because investors don't always look at it that way.
No,
so a friend of mine,
investors aren't entrepreneurs.
Which is both an entrepreneur investor, a guy named Gene Rickers.
Sure.
As you know, I'll never forget. We were in the middle of waiting to hear back from this firm that was going to buy us 2 years ago, And I went to breakfast with him. He's like, meet me at the old Tried and True. I said, where's that? He goes, the McLean Restaurant.
Yeah, there you go.
So we show up at the McLean
Terrible
Restaurant.
food, but we're all there.
We're all
It's
there,
amazing.
exactly. So we show up at the McLean Restaurant, and I said, Gene, I said, you're 60 years old or 55, or I said, you've done this, you've been successful. Help me navigate this water right now. I respect you. And he said, Dean, he said, you're gonna have to determine whether you can do what no one else can do. I said, what's that? He said, you're gonna have to see if you can get back on the horse. He said, you're mostly checked out, your check's supposed to arrive in a week, and you now assume the deal's dead. He said, can you grow it? And I said, and I had to do a lot of thinking, introspection on that.
Yeah.
I said, you know what, the best opportunity I have is to bet on myself instead of somebody else. And I said, let's do this. And that's when we rehired our whole management team, and we ended up selling for a 35% premium a year later.
So what you described, and I will tell you, and this is a life lesson for anybody, most of the time when somebody comes to you and tells you they want to buy the business, it's not going to close. Most of the time it's not going to close. And a lot of the time it won't be obvious it's not going to close until the night before or a week before, because of the dynamic of how people go about buying a business, the way lawyers get involved, speaking as a former deal guy. It will look a lot to you like the deal's going to close until it doesn't, because people will keep those little dark secrets about whether or not they want to close away from you, either because they want to maximize their leverage over you or because they don't want to concern you. But most deals don't close. And most entrepreneurs who have not been through the experience don't know that. They think, I've got my letter of intent, deal's going to close. That moment in time when the deal doesn't close is, I think, the biggest existential challenge that entrepreneurs have, because if you're building a good business, you will get opportunities to be bought along the way, right? It just kind of happens. And in fact, that's a validation for whether or not you're building a good business. Businesses don't get sold, they get bought, right? So what you face, believe it or not, you're a template. And I've seen a lot of people fail as a result of that, or end up in a distressed sale mode. In my portfolio, I've seen it happen a couple of times. Guys they can't ever recover. So how did you recover?
You know, two things. One thing I did is I went to a place called the Blessing Ranch. And the Blessings Ranch was a guy named Dr. John Walker that's worked with 3,500 Christian leaders over the last 30 years. And he said, you know what, let's figure out what about drives you. We figured out what was motivating me, what I was struggling with as a leader, as a man, as a person. And I went through a process of refreshing myself. And when I came back from that experience in July, I said, you know what, let's do this. And at that point, we went and hired a new CFO. We went and hired our whole new team. And it was the chance to say, you know what, we're going to commit to this. Because I remember actually when I was recruiting Catherine, I said, look, we got a 3-year run here. We're going to make this thing big. We're going to make this happen. What happens is you find this funny, and you guys will, or at least I will, is we go through this process. Is Catherine was the last executive we hired of the 6 I hired. We rehired him. The day she started was the day this company calls me and says, hey, we're interested in a strategic investment in you. And I said, I'm not for sale. And we turned him down 3 times, saying, I don't even want to talk to you. You don't understand. I've been through this emotional espionage, I call it, for the last year.
Yeah,
last thing I want to do is sell this company. I'm ready to grow. We're ready to run fast. And we go through this process of doing this. And you know what would be interesting is I want to bring out one thing to this process of the sale was, do you know where the lead came from? This market. Of all places. So the company's based in Ridgeland, Mississippi, $1 billion family-owned company. I'm in Mobile, Alabama. And it was a fraternity brother that ran a tech company up here that was introduced through our network up here. And the chairman of that company, which is a fraternity brother from Vanderbilt, we're having beers after we had met one day and says, hey, you need to meet this guy. And that's how the intro came. I called him the other day, the morning the deal was closing actually, I called him, I said, you remember me? He's like, yeah, I haven't seen you from a year, what happened? He said, what happened to that introduction? I said, we're closing today. He said, what? He said, I had no idea. He said, it was just my fraternity brother said he wanted to meet you one day. But you know, it's the power of relationships and network that you never quite know who's going to introduce you to.
It's actually Catherine Ferguson and Cooley, right? So it's your fault. Yeah, this is all.
It's
right?
all
Basically, so the moral of the story is that if you want to get your company sold, you hire Catherine and Cooley, and within a week, you get a deal. It's amazing. It's just,
Get the call.
just get the call, right? So you're not leaving this room with that 27 cards now, exactly. But so I think this is a good place to spring off and talk about your faith and how it informs. I will tell you, I was talking with another friend of ours, Rick Gordon, Mach 37 Accelerator, another good friend. If you don't know about Mach 37 Accelerator, it's a really interesting idea to try to jumpstart cyber here in town. And we and I were talking about faith yesterday, you know, and he said to me, and I said, how does it inform your entrepreneurial journey? And he said, you know, for me, knowing that whatever I do in life, it's going to work out okay in the long run, you know, I can take any risk I want to take as long as I'm true to myself. And is that where it begins for you?
Yeah, so faith is the foundation of everything I do. I mean, you know, I'm a very outspoken believer and Christian, as you know. But at the end of the day, I know that God's blessed me with these series of attributes, and if I follow what He's called me to do, and I do it really well every day, and I serve Him and honor Him, everything's going to work out. You know, it's so interesting is my whole team understands that, you know, we prayed before company meetings. We didn't care what people thought. We tell people when you're being recruited, this is a faith-based, values-based company, and if you don't like it, it's okay. There's plenty of other companies for you to go work for. We just want to tell you up front. We don't want you to be discriminated against, and if you have a different faith, that's okay. We have Jehovah's Witnesses, we have different people, but these are the values that we run the companies around. And I'll never forget, when we were going to negotiate, they called us March of 2013, okay? We were supposed to close, I told them 60 days to close. I didn't want a long process. It took 11 months to close, to your point. But going to the process, it was August. They were renegotiating, and we said, we're going to get in a room, we're going to make a decision what we sell to you once and for all, right? I walk into that room, there's a CFO and the COO that was on the other side of my CFO, and I looked at him and said, guys, I got to be true to myself. And he said, what do you mean? I said, we pray before every company meeting, we have a big decision. Can I ask them to bless us over this? And they looked at me like, serious? Yeah, sure, go ahead. You know, but you know, I think that principle in life, whatever you believe, is to be principles based and to be true to yourself and true to what you believe, and it does work out. I know there's a higher power, you know, and God watching out for me, and that's who it is. And I can't tell you how many people have resonated. I had literally had 3 entrepreneurs from this community, which were in my mindshare class and all, called me the other day and said, you know, that faith thing, can you talk to me a little more about it? He said, because I had this when I was a kid and I've now struggled with it, and there's very public names you know about, and it's been interesting to see how the world's come around, and that's been another aspect of what we do.
Well, I think it's important. The other thing that I think is important to think about, talk about is, so last week I saw a play. That's not relevant, but wow, he has a social life. Who knew? But it was.
I knew it was under there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look at me. I mean, it just says party, doesn't it? But anyways, it was a play about a fellow named Paul Robeson, and Paul Robeson was a singer and an activist in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and a very big advocate of equality and racial and economic equality. And he got blacklisted by Hollywood and so forth. It's a very hard life. The last part of the play was basically, why do you do it? You know, why did you set yourself up? You were at the top of the game. You were, you know, he was one of the first African Americans to go to Rutgers. He graduated Columbia Law School. The man's life was basically, it was part of the establishment. And he threw it all away. And why'd you throw it all away? And he said, well, because I was blessed with an amazing talent, the talent of singing. And I had a responsibility, because I was blessed with this great talent, to do something for the world. I could not do something for the world. And Dean, what's interesting to me about that is there was no discussion of faith, there wasn't a religious conversation, but the message is the same, I think, isn't it? I mean,
it is. I was just talking this morning at 6:30 this morning to, I'm on the board at Liberty University, their business school, and the dean, we had been trying to catch up, he called me and he was telling me the experience of how a young MBA grad was offered a really great job at PwC, starting her career, and she had done a trip to China. And she came back and said, you know, I'm turning down the job at PwC because I believe I really need to be in China doing what I'm called to do, because this is my talent, and the Chinese people believe this is where I'm at. And that was the whole principle. Just what he said is, this young lady, which has been given a really great job to start her career, says, you know what, that's not the best use of my talents. And that's you know, that's what we have. And I think that's one of the things we did in our business, that if I can bring to a business principle we used, was we really struggled with our culture for a long time. I mean, I had really high turnover, 25–30% turnover a year. It was really tough. And it was because we didn't focus on people's talents and their giftedness. So there's a book called The Strength Finders, Donald Rath, Marcus Buckingham, if you haven't read it, talks about your strengths. We did a combination of recruiting via the strengths and understanding, helping people place to where they are, and we also had to change the culture. Because when you had that much turnover, it was a culture. We had 4, 5, 6 people that were at the core of the company, and everybody else cycled in and cycled out. Now I don't think we had anybody in the last 12 months turnover at all. So we've had a huge shift, and that's the reason why we brought in a chief culture officer. That's the reason why we made some changes. That's why we focused on the people's giftedness, but also focused on the passions and focused on what that made them drive every day. Because what I found is, as a leader, if you can help people find their giftedness and help them love what they do every day, then the fringe benefits of taking care of customers and all those other things we worry about, customer satisfaction, take care of themselves because people are doing what they're passionate about.
So, what's his name? John McKay of Whole Foods? Or was it Mackie McKay? He talks about from the standpoint of social entrepreneurship. And what's interesting is people think, oh, so what do you mean by that? Well, you got to worry about constituencies other than your shareholders. You've got to make sure your employees care about coming to work. You got to make sure that the community cares about your company. Conscious capitalism is actually the phrase that's used. And so some people say, well, wait a minute, so you're not a capitalist anymore? You're not interested in shareholder value? And his answer is actually, if you look at the best companies, the ones that are most profitable, the ones that outperform the S&P consistently, what they all have in common is they are companies with strong service components, strong cultures, and a strong sense of building value for the stakeholders other than the shareholders. And those companies tend to outperform because the employees work like animals, right? Customers love their products. Southwest Airlines, Whole Foods, your company. I mean, what do you think? Is this conscious capitalism movement the way we should be building companies?
I think it is. You know what? Probably the best compliment that probably was the most emotional experience post-deal for me was when the gentleman I work for now, which is the CEO of the company, and his right-hand lady, they came to me and said, we totally missed the most important part of this company. I said, what do you mean? He said, for the last 11 months, we did our due diligence, and we were all about financials, EBITDA, we beat you over this expense and that expense. He said, we never paid any attention to people. He said, these people are 1.5 to 2 times more productive than the people in our company. They're passionate. He said, our name of their company is C-Spire, which stands for Customer Inspired. The whole company about a customer in the room in every meeting, etc. He said, but you guys take it, he's like, you're like our experience on steroids. He said, we're hoping that the fire that we have in this 50-person company bleeds to the 1,100 persons that we have in the rest of our company. And I think that in fact, he went to the whole point, he said, don't call the CFO and ask for more money because you could have gotten it now. You know, the point is, they don't you love
that? Don't you love that?
And he's like, don't call and ask for more money now because if we had have seen this before, and we tried to get him to look at it, but it was the CFO running the deal and it was all about finances.
How do you react to that? Well, thanks, I guess.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Can you let me on that earn out a year?
Exactly. Well, I got a really interesting conversation about the escrow, I think.
So we'll make a long story short, the best, you want to talk about the best compliment is having people come in and say, your people are something we don't see every day.
Okay.
And I think people are cultures, and it was our culture that changed that.
So let me ask you this question, because I've thought about this a lot. Entrepreneurs get crazed over corporate control. You know, the founder's dilemma. Do I take money or do I give up control? And we'll talk about how you capitalize the business. You didn't take a lot of money. In fact, I don't think you took any money from outsiders, right?
Nope.
But my argument is that the most important thing an entrepreneur can control is not the corporate governance, it's the culture. Only the entrepreneur can set the vision for an organization. Is that what you found?
Yeah, and the interesting things that I would say about that is you can set it with your voice, and then you can set it with your actions, and your actions are going to speak 1,000 times louder than your words. And you're saying the right things, but if you're not backing it up, it's a simple phrase we talk about. Actions speak louder than words.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, as the leader, the little things I did, from whether it was we started the thing that on every anniversary I wrote a handwritten card and we shipped it to their house. I couldn't believe, we'd give them money, but I couldn't believe the most appreciation I got from our team members. They'd come up and say, do you have a couple minutes? I can't believe you took the time to send a card to my house. My wife saw that. She's like, what person running companies takes the time to do these things? It's just those little things that invested. I'm big. We had one of our team members' son, 8-year-old son, got cancer, brain cancer. We spent a lot of time giving back to them. We quietly put them in their, I didn't realize this, we heard they had cancer, we put them in our airplane and we shipped them up to Memphis to do what they do and took care of travel expenses. We did little things like that says we're gonna put our money where our mouth is and our time where our money is, and it made a huge difference on the quiet impact of the company. The replications, what happens behind the scenes, so you're standing here as a leader, and all the things that happen underneath multiply when you do those things right.
So that communicates the culture, connectiveness.
Yep.
But I'm willing to bet that you also had computing systems that didn't get in the way of how people did their jobs, that you had an office set up that encouraged people to be team-oriented, that you had compensation ranges. In other words,
We did all those things. Yeah, so,
Right.
so people made an average 10 to 15%, 20% more than they make a competitive job.
Mhm.
We had open environments. We got rid of offices and we did cubicles and all those things. We did things differently.
Mhm.
And so yeah, so we put things a lot of perspective. But the biggest thing we had to do in the last year was focusing on the culture. And that was the deliberative reviews, events, employee appreciation week, all those other things.
that's one of the big lessons I want everybody to take away, is that people talk about culture like it falls from the sky. Culture doesn't fall from the sky. Culture comes from a really smart entrepreneur having a clear vision of how they want to walk the walk, and then working with management to create basically an operational environment that doesn't get in the way of those values.
We tell them take care of the customer, whatever it takes. You'll never get in trouble for taking care of the customer. You give money away, you do what he's done, you make the right decision by the customer. In fact, we had a phrase that we all know. We measure in smiles. And they said, why? I said, because if that customer's smiling, then the profits will hit long term. It's not a problem.
So what are you going to do now?
I don't know. Got to open that door. We'll figure that out. But right now, I'm focused on growing the business. I just joined the board of another company here called Digital Global Systems, and just spending a lot of time working with entrepreneurs and networking to find out what the next thing is. But I believe the wealth engines and the changes in what this world needs is people to take technology in the technology world and solve real world problems. What Square solved for credit card for small businesses, Nest did for people's houses and thermostats. I think there'll be something along those lines of a really big idea.
So you guys have some questions for Dean? I have a few more, but throw it open to you.
I'll ask a question.
Go ahead.
I'm Carlos from Power Fingerprinting, small business here.
Nice to meet
And how do you go about hiring people? Because you said you were focusing on a number of things. So what's the process and what are you looking into for the people that you're hiring?
Two things I'll say about that. Number one was I realized I was the worst hirer in the world. So I actually brought Catherine in, which had executive recruiting background, and I turned that over. And the best hires we had somebody focusing on it, did it really well, because that's not my giftedness. Actually, part of the turnover was I hired people because I really liked you, not that you were really great for the job. And we had a great group, and it's interesting, if you do that strength finder test.
You were rush chairman.
All the things that was funny is if you looked at the first 8 people hired in the company, they all had that belief. Like it was like we all had certain characteristics that ran through. So number one, I got myself out of the way from doing it. Number one. Number two, the second thing I would say is we use a lot of the tools in networking, and I got really big through the process in the last year of focusing on getting everybody's opinion on that person and getting everybody's buy-in. Because people, whether it's the CFO or your marketing or just some advisors, we didn't talk about it. I had recruited a board of directors from up here, and the board was independents. I didn't need them for financial reasons. I just had them because I wanted accountability. And I got them all involved. Every one of my board members interviewed the top 5 candidates for the CFO. They gave me a write-up on each one of them. And the number one thing that made my CFO successful in this business, why we exited, is my CFO was able to stand up to me in a respectful way without going around me. And I'll never forget Edwin Miller, which is on my board, said to me, we came down to 2 final candidates. He said, Dean, that one will go around you and burn you. This one will stand up to you. He'll tell you what you need to hear even when you don't want to hear. And so let me tell you when that became one of my life principles, why that became important was, I'll never forget, it was in October and I got off the plane. And I'll never forget, he called me and said, Dean, we have to have a talk. So what we have to talk about? Well, I had all these other companies. And one of the companies I capitalized with a friend, put money into this other company. And we never papered it. We just put the money in, handled it, and it was done. And he said, Dean, I need to know how this was done. And I told him, I said, well, what do you want it to be? He said, stop. He said, if I'm going to protect you, you need to tell me the story the way it is, not the way you want it to be. I understand you can move it around. That's not the way this works if I'm going to protect you. And that was one of the biggest principles I had, is I had a guy that cared and loved my family enough to stand up to me as his leader. He says, I don't care if you fire me for being disrespectful. What I care about is protecting you and helping you, and realize you don't have all the answers, but I want to help you. And he had 10 years on me. And he had been a great CFO in this market. And I'll never forget, we laughed and we actually cried as 2 men around it. He said, I was scared that you were going to fire me because I was 3 months into the job. And I'm telling you that what you're doing, I don't know if I can believe you. And I wasn't lying to him, but I wasn't sitting down. There were certain principles. And so I had that guy, which was my best friend in closing the deal. He had my back through the whole process. So the deal was closed. We took care of him. We actually gave him a $100,000 extra bonus at the end, just because on top of everything he was owed, just because this guy was so faithful to us. But the reason why I had that guy is I had a team of people recruiting and helping me through the process. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to add anything to it, Catherine?
I would just say a thorough interview process and being open with the candidates as to what they're walking into and identifying what their strengths are and what they can get passionate about. You'll get people apply for things and they'll have all the credentials, and you'll make sacrifices because they look good on paper, or they have this experience, they can do this type of software development, that sort of thing. But they don't have the other elements, and we came to a place where we wouldn't sacrifice on other elements of would they fit in with the team, what is their decision-making style, how do they prove that, how have they done that in the past, and then we got the management team, the whole management team would interview, or most of them would interview for every person when we got to the finalist stage. And they were able to spot holes that, for example, I wasn't able to spot, Dean wasn't able to spot, because we had multiple people buying into it. And when we solved the problem of hiring the wrong people, or hiring the kind of right people, kind of not, culture just took off. These guys were so passionate. We had a major tech crisis, and people worked for 4 weeks straight around the clock, and we didn't ever ask them to. They weren't going to give up. They wanted to get it solved for our customers, and that brought on more customers. So hiring is key. It's a huge problem, and happy to talk to anybody and help you guys, but it really turned things around.
Yeah, so you want to talk about crisis mode. They approached us in March, and we signed a term sheet with them in May. In April, I was actually at the Final Four at a board meeting. Our whole email server crashed, and we had 4,000 accounts down, and the backup had been corrupted because another guy did it. So we lost it, and it only 1% of our revenue, but it's affected 40% of our customers. Oh, you want to talk about protection? I sat there with the executive. I said, "Did you guys even realize we had this email sabbatical in the middle of doing a term sheet with you?" They said, "No, we had no idea. Our customers knew, the media knew, everybody knew, but somehow we got protecting us. They never knew because I'm sweating bullets going away. Everything I just built just went up in flames." So
Wow.
we went through it, but she was right. The whole team worked. Literally, they slept. Their families brought them food. They stayed in the office. They did what they had to do it. You just can't hire that. It's just a culture.
That's right. Other questions?
Yes, sir.
You said that after the deal closed, the folks who acquired you kind of expressed surprise at how good your folks were. How come they didn't know before that? I mean, was culture a big part of the due diligence from your standpoint about placing your company in the right hands? Or?
Yeah, so it's really fascinating. So this company in 50 years has 1,200 employees, and they've never laid somebody off in 50 years. They have moved people to another spot, like they've given other jobs, but except for somebody for ethical violation, they've never fired somebody. They've always had a spot for somebody in 50 years. However, what was interesting for it is they came through a strategic connection, as we talked about, and I wouldn't talk to them unless they told me all about their customer inspired. So they told me all about their network. I do due diligence with other people that work with them. They're trying to recruit their employees. They wouldn't leave. People love working there. That was important to us. However, it was a CFO running the thing, and the guy was literally an ex-investment banker, came to the auditing department before that, and he was more worried about our depreciation capitalization than he was worried about this. So, an example, they're paying 18 times cash flow and a 12 times premium over what's in our market spots. They're paying a premium price for us because I wouldn't talk to them if they didn't. Mm-hmm. They never asked for my sales pipeline in 11 months.
Really?
Not one time. And I said to my boss,
You're lucky the deal closed.
I said, you never looked at my pipeline. You never looked at my people. He's like, we were told we're going to make this we're very conservative financially, so we were going to make it based on EBITDA. If you would do a deal with us, we were willing to pay a premium. And he said, if we would have done that, this thing would have closed faster because we didn't, all these values they didn't have. So it's just the point is, if you do things right financially we were doing things right so we could get through their process of their due diligence. I mean, financial due diligence was 6 months and regulatory approval was 3, so
Right.
that's what the time was.
Well, and again, it goes back to, you hired a good CFO. That person who stood up to you obviously did a good job. That's another place where so you never take outside money. And a lot of the companies I've seen that don't take outside money are family-owned businesses. And they grow up, and they don't run the business professionally. And then it comes time to sell, and it often falls apart because there are no financials. There's no good financial reporting. So
We wanted to be prepared regardless. If we didn't sell, we knew we'd maybe raise capital, we'd do something different.
Right.
We wanted to be prepared. The second thing we have is we always treat our bankers like our partners, because somebody has to ask me, how did
commercial bank, you mean, not investment bank.
Our commercial bank, how did you, we were doing a little bit sub of $15 million. We had a $3.5 million or $4 million we closed line of credit unsecured. And I had no wealth. I mean, I'll be honest with you guys, I didn't have $50,000 of savings. Everything I put was back in this company. Now, on paper, I was very rich in equity. I had a lot of assets.
Right.
I had no liquid wealth. And I convinced the banker, and they said to me, how did you convince a banker to lend you $4 million year in and year out to grow a company on cash flow? And it was simple. I heard Donald Trump once say, treat your bankers like your best friends. So I brought my bankers with me, and I got to know them. And every year, before I asked for money, I would do a review like a board. I put a packet together for them. I showed where we were going. I gave customer testimonials. I gave financials. I showed cash flow, and I showed why we had to use the capital. And those guys would take that book, put it in front of the underwriters, and said, we want to take a bet. And it started with $500,000, then it went to $1 million, then it went to $2 million, and as we kept growing. And because we had that control, and we didn't have somebody pushing us to grow too fast or do what we didn't need to do, or not worry about making a sales number over making a quarter, it was a blessing. Did I answer your question properly?
Yeah, I think so. I guess what I was getting at, did you push the culture thing on them? I mean, it sounds like it was a financial deal.
I didn't push the culture thing on them. They wanted it. The problem was the CFO was the block between the rest of the company that wanted to see the culture. And until the deal closed, he said he wouldn't bring the bail up.
Often big companies have a deal team, have a deal guy.
Sure, yeah.
Once the deal's closed, everybody came in, and there was like a breath of fresh air, and then the guy just got a pat on the back from the owners of the company saying, wow, it's even better than we thought it was. That's great. Yes, sir.
Was there anything else responsible for your culture change? It sounds like you talked about new hiring processes. You talked about this review of people's passions and strengths. What other things contributed to that flip where you don't see that 30%?
I think, so let me speak to, how many entrepreneurs are there in the room? So one of the things I would say from us as entrepreneurs is, to be successful, you have to be self-examining of yourself always and figure out where your strengths, your weaknesses is. One of my weaknesses was I didn't communicate well. I assumed people knew what they needed to do. So like I took the hiring out, I also took the communication. So I had somebody actually writing all my communications, writing my emails, being thoughtful, being transparent. All the stuff I wanted to say that I wasn't really good about saying, somebody did it. And then what was really great is the executive team let it come from my office. So before, I would do these things and no one knew about them, and so they didn't give me credit. So I became the biggest jerk in the business. You just beat us to take care of customers. You just push us so hard. You just do these things. Now it became that I was a person. And because I did that, part of the culture was focusing on overly communicating, and the team was really well about saying, we're going to be a team, but you're our leader. And so I want the people to realize when you do these things. So for instance, the night we were announcing the deal, we only owed 6 people in the company a cash compensation when the deal closed. Every person that had been there a year walked away with a cash compensation because we said, you know what, we want this to be something that's all your family's with. Now, it was $500 a year, so it wasn't a ton of money, but the point is, we have people that walk away with $4,000 or $5,000 that had just been faithful and says, you know what, it was great. The second thing that was part of that culture is when we were being purchased, I did a lot of due diligence on them to find out how they were going to take care of our employees. So for instance, their benefits package went up. You guys are familiar with an ESOP? Each of the employees were grandfathered in and based on their time at Callis, so they immediately became ESOP owners in the company. People have been 5 years there. So these people have 401ks, they have profit sharing, they have all these things that weren't available to them in our size company that are immediately getting wealth. So we wanted to make sure that was the fit too. And also the other fit was about this was to make sure on this deal side that the people understood that they were being, this wasn't just a win for Dean and the Dean's family, right? This was a win for everybody, that everybody was going to get an opportunity to advance their career in a greater spot versus, when you get to a 50-person company, unless we're going to 5,000, there's only so many executive positions you can get to.
Right.
So I was able to do that. But if I had to pick one thing, it had to be communications. By far, increasing the communications. The second thing I would say was, I have one of my principles here. I'm just going to read it to you. It's like, I'm going to read one. It says, culture is part of the company. Stand up for it. Make sure you're being a leader. And with that, make sure, I said when I had my executive team, we made sure we did that together. So everybody had to be bolted into the culture, but everybody did it differently. So for instance, Catherine was Chief Culture Officer, so she was the verbal, the communication, the events. Our CFO never responded to an email. We had a thing called honk. It was everybody seen a geese video where one geese falls out of the line, the V fly, and the other ones pick them up and they keep them going. We had this geese video. We talked about it. Does anybody know what I'm talking about, the geese?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, so if you don't know, okay, the geese fly in a V, right?
Yeah.
And if one geese falls down, they start honking, and the louder they honk, it means somebody's falling out, and the whole set of geese pick that one back up, put it behind to fly below, and they keep flying so they go for long distances. We took that culture and people did it differently. So as CFO, we talked about this on a ride back from a meeting I was speaking at 2 nights ago. He used to do things different. His culture was not email or in front of the whole thing, but he'd go down and have a cup of coffee in the morning when he was there, and he would sit down with the developer and say, tell me about your family, tell me what's going on, how's your job working, how's your boss doing? And he was this calming effect that he did it behind the scenes. Other people did it in front of the scenes, but the whole team being bought into it, and they know that I had their back, and I would stand up for them. All whole bar, if they made the decision, it doesn't matter what we lost, they made the best decision, and I trusted them, and I believed in them. It was not about me anymore, it was about our team. Those are the 2 principles I would say. And I'm a little passionate about this, so
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm never going to look at the same way I've ever seen. I'm going to honk, right? Honk.
Well, I'm gonna start sending emails to you, honk a text to you.
Yeah, exactly. You should.
Say,
I think you sort of spoke to this a little bit, but how difficult is the balance between, I would say, the venture finance world and the employee development world? Because at the end of the day, right, the deal is worth what the CFO says it's worth, but I think as a as a personal person, you want to get in there and do development. So if you do that, it's cash flow first, right? You have to be profitable to be a successful business, but you also want to develop your team. So do you find those kind of conflicting points of view, or what comes first?
I think you have to, if you're going to take capital, you're going to have to choose advisors that stay with your vision and your principle. So let me tell you what I mean by that. I had the belief, because I failed at this business twice. When I say failed, the market matured at Pages and we're on a business. I then raised this borrowed money to put this phone system in. I was traveling all around the country getting people that resold phone systems to resell us, and they wouldn't do it. So I was left with nothing else, but I believe that the principle of people buy from people and relationships are important, and there will always be room for somebody that has a relationship-based business selling. And you've got to be in a geographical territory where you can own and love and hug your customers and see them every day and do what you need to do. I was in a world that everybody else in my industry said no, they had to be medical, they had to be verticals, you had to be nationwide, they had to do all this stuff. And I said, no, I don't believe that. Well, one of the things that came for that is I would not capitalize on that. So if I had advisors and capital people I was talking to, they had to believe in my principle. And I wouldn't back down from that principle because I knew what this would be. In my heart, I just had passion and vision for this. The reason we were only one of 3 companies in our industry right now to be sold that was growing up the way we are, and the reason was we stuck to our principles. Those guys that decided to follow every investor that said, you need to do this, the next investor said, you need to do that. Those guys are still fumbling, trying to find out their way in the world, and now they're increased competition and they don't know if they're going to get sold.
Yeah, I think that, the really interesting issue is that we live in a society where the media glamorizes certain things and trivializes them. And one of the things that it glamorizes is this whole concept of raising capital. I mean, if you read the tech press for anything longer than an hour, you will come away with the cult of entrepreneur thinks of something, miraculously creates $1 billion. I mean, everybody's talking about WhatsApp today, $19.5 billion. Unbelievable, 50 employees. There's
instant messaging.
Instant messaging. There's this cult around huge wins overnight. The other cult, which trivializes entrepreneurship and underestimates the reality, is that every now and then there's a unicorn experience, but most great wins for families and entrepreneurs are in the $30 to $100 million range, and those are real businesses, they're bought for real multiples. But nobody talks about that. The other thing that nobody talks about, everybody talks about venture investors like they're the crown prince of corporate finance. And I will tell you, having had the experience, for years I was an investment banker, a hedge fund guy for a while, then I was a lawyer for a while, and then when I stopped practicing law, I started Amplifier, and I found it really interesting how, by changing the title of my business card, how people treated me was very different. My jokes became funnier. I became more interesting. People wanted me to come to events.
Definitely better looking.
I'm much taller now than I was then. I was 5'6" and hair on my back. It was really interesting, but well, anyway. But my point is that the whole tech press it's designed to create this interesting funnel for the venture capital industry, and the angel capital is more venture capital. That you're a loser if you don't get VC. You're somehow not a real entrepreneur if you don't have money from Kleiner Perkins or Teresa Horowitz. And the reality of life is that venture capital is a financial investment tool, just like hedge funds, just like private equity funds. It's just an investment vehicle for people with money. It's a financial asset. And the people that manage venture capital funds are making investments to make money. They're not making investments to grow companies. They're making investments to make money because legally, they have to do that. Now, people in the industry that are good at it generally understand that if you come in and you start telling the entrepreneur what to do, and if you start telling the entrepreneur how to run their business, if you start trying to manage a business like a financial asset, you will fail. Because entrepreneurship basically is autonomy. And the best entrepreneurs will succeed because of their characteristics. So what I tell my students, first of all, is if you think you need venture capital, you don't, unless you're a very specific kind of business. It's a very specific corporate finance tool, growing really rapidly. It's a financing tool of last resort, not first resort. And the second thing, and I think Dean was touching on this, if you're going to take money from a financial investor, take it from somebody who understands that you're the boss of the company. And because you are. You're the boss of the culture, you're the boss of how the business grows. A VC who grabs a stick and tries to fly the plane will fly it into a mountain every time because they don't have the time to make the business work. So what you want is to be in a situation where your business is so compelling and so successful that if you have to take money, you can create competition. So you can choose who to take money from. The same way that you should create a business to never sell it, so that when somebody turns up and wants to buy it, you don't have to sell. So that's how it works together. You can take money. If he took money,
I would have wasted it, guys. Let me tell you something.
yeah, you wouldn't have wasted. You would have taken it for the right. You would have taken money from Gene Rickers or somebody like that.
But I'm saying it's easy. I will tell you this too. The one thing I've seen with all my competitors, or we call them cooperators, they're in I formed the Cloud Communications Alliance, which is a whole other story. But all my competitors that I'm really close with, they spend 50% of their time managing their investors.
Yeah.
Not focusing on the business. I would not be here today, sitting in front of you, really blessed with a wonderful, win, if I had to manage investors, because I was all about managing customers and team. And most people they're spending literally 2 weeks a month preparing their board reports and talking to investors and being micromanaged.
Well, I'd suggest they might not have the right investors, but because you can find investors who will not be as intrusive.
Sure.
But having said that, I guess the moral of the story is that for all of you, understand that venture capital is a financing tool.
And it's high.
And it's expensive money, and and there's a lot of operational compliance you have to do. If you can finance a business through cash flow or with a bank, do it all day long.
Let me close on this story. 2004, I showed up in this market for the first time. Worked with a guy named Troy Hartless, which actually ran our sales on our team, and Ed and Troy were working together. I'll never forget, I showed up on Sunrise Valley Drive there in Reston or Herndon, and they have this beautiful office and this furniture, and they're driving these big Mercedes and BMWs. I'm a guy with a $500,000 revenue business, flying, worrying about spending 50 extra bucks on dinner, right? And they take me to dinner at Morton's, and and I'm hoping the bill doesn't come to me, right? And I'm trying to sell my phone system. And I'll never forget, I was so memorized by their investors and all these big names, and I was like, I went home and I remember saying, I've done something wrong. I've done something really wrong. And it was Edwin that actually said when he joined my board, he said, no, you didn't. Keep doing what you do, and you're gonna have more money than the rest of us. Those guys needed another job when the deal sold. They picked up the phone, they came to work. And sure, everybody got an investment, but they all look back at me and going, I wish I had done that, and I had these great jobs and great benefits, but it's nothing like being able to build on your dream and have a long-term wealth built.
Before I let you go, you sent me these lessons learned through the years. These are great. This is so much better than a Letterman top 10 list. I want you to actually tell folks these lessons learned.
All right, drum roll. No,
Exactly. Don't shoot the monkey.
Exactly. No, that's a whole other story.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'll just leave these with you in closing. When one market closes, another market opens, and I always said, listen to your customers because they will show you the opportunity. The reason why we were in the business we are is because our customers said, I need this business really bad. When God closes the door of one deal, put your head down and keep working, another opportunity is coming, to our point we talked about. Culture is not part of a company, it is the company. Stand up and lead it, and be the man or woman you need to be to lead the culture. Remember to take time to refresh yourself as a leader, weekly, monthly, or yearly. A burnout leader is no good to anyone. Choose your leadership team carefully. Make sure they are there for the right reasons, and they have your back. But most importantly, you must have their back at all times. Surround yourself with advisors you admire and trust, and give them more than you'll ask of them. Make sure you plan to secure 30% more capital than you need, because you will need it. Don't take shortcuts. Build your business like it'll be here for 50 years. Be passionate about what you do, or don't do it at all and go do something else. Never stop dreaming big. And remember, finally and most importantly, you're going to meet the same people on the way up as the way down. Treat everybody with honor, respect, and dignity.
Well, Dee, that was just terrific. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you.